Amara Collins had spent the final months of her pregnancy convincing herself that Trevor's growing distance was simply nerves, the natural anxiety any young man might feel facing impending fatherhood for the first time. She had wanted so badly to believe that once their daughter actually arrived, once he held her tiny hand and looked into her face, everything would settle into place exactly as she had hoped. She had been wrong. The delivery had gone smoothly, and Amara remembered those first exhausted, joyful hours afterward as some of the happiest of her entire life, cradling her newborn daughter Zoe against her chest, while Trevor sat quietly in the corner of the hospital room, his expression unreadable in a way that should have worried her considerably more than it had at the time. "Isn't she perfect?" Amara had asked softly, exhaustion and overwhelming love evident clearly in her tired voice, as she gently offered Zoe toward him. Trevor had stared at the tiny bundle for a long, uncomfortable moment before shaking his head slightly, stepping back rather than reaching forward. "I can't do this, Amara," he said quietly, though his voice carried an unmistakable finality that made her chest tighten instantly with dread. "I thought I could, but I can't. This isn't the life I wanted." Amara felt her entire body go cold, disbelief crashing over her as she processed his words. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her attempt at composure. "Trevor, she's your daughter." "I know," he said, guilt flickering briefly across his features before hardening into something considerably colder. "I'm sorry. I just can't be a father right now. I need you to understand that." The argument that followed grew increasingly heated, Amara's disbelief transforming into raw, desperate anger as Trevor calmly explained his decision to leave, his voice never once rising despite the devastating nature of what he was saying, as though he had rehearsed this exact abandonment for weeks. A nurse eventually stepped in gently, asking Trevor to step outside given the need for Amara to rest. Though the damage had already been thoroughly, irreversibly done, he left the hospital entirely that same evening, offering no further explanation beyond a brief, cowardly text message hours later confirming he wouldn't be returning. Not that night, and from the tone of his message, not ever. Amara spent that first night alone with Zoe, tears streaming silently down her face as she held her daughter close, terror and heartbreak warring within her exhausted mind. 3 days later, discharged and facing the daunting reality of bringing her newborn home entirely alone, Amara stepped out through the hospital's main entrance into the cool evening air. Zoe bundled carefully against her chest, uncertain exactly how she would even manage the short walk to catch a bus given her exhaustion. "Miss Collins." Amara turned, startled, to find a tall, composed man standing near a sleek black car parked along the curb, his expression carrying quiet, genuine concern rather than the pity she had grown to dread from well-meaning strangers. She recognized him immediately, Vincenzo Salerno, the landlord who owned the small building housing the flower shop where she worked part-time, a man she had exchanged only brief, polite pleasantries with over the past year. "Mr. Salerno," she said, surprise evident clearly in her exhausted voice. "What are you doing here?" "I happen to be visiting a colleague upstairs," Vincenzo replied evenly, though something in his careful tone suggested his presence was considerably less coincidental than his simple explanation implied. "I couldn't help but overhear what happened in your room a few nights ago. The walls in this hospital are regrettably thin." Amara felt humiliation flood through her instantly, understanding clearly that he had likely heard every painful detail of Trevor's cold, devastating abandonment. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," she said quickly, embarrassment evident clearly in her flustered tone. "There's nothing for you to apologize for," Vincenzo replied firmly, his tone carrying genuine sincerity rather than any judgment. "Any man unwilling to stand beside a woman raising his own child isn't worth a single moment of your tears." "Miss Collins," Amara studied him closely, surprised by the quiet warmth evident beneath his composed, authoritative demeanor. "Thank you for saying that," she said softly, gratitude evident clearly in her tired voice. I should get going. It's a bit of a walk to the bus stop. Please, Vincenzo said, gesturing toward his car, allow me to drive you home instead. It's been an extraordinarily difficult few days, and the last thing you and your daughter need is a long walk in the cold evening air. Amara hesitated, uncertain exactly how to respond to such unexpected kindness from someone she barely knew, though exhaustion and the weight of Zoe's small, sleeping form against her chest made the decision considerably easier than her usual caution might have allowed. I'd appreciate that, she admitted honestly, following him gratefully toward the waiting car, as Vincenzo carefully helped her settle Zoe's car seat and pulled smoothly away from the hospital. Amara found herself studying him quietly from the passenger seat, entirely unaware of just how significantly this single, unplanned act of kindness would soon transform her entire uncertain future, and Zoe's as well. Vincenzo drove carefully through the quiet evening streets, glancing occasionally toward Amara, who sat exhausted in the passenger seat, her eyes fixed tenderly on Zoe's sleeping form in the car seat behind her. "You've had an extraordinarily difficult few days," he said gently, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "How are you managing, honestly?" Amara considered the question carefully, surprised by her own willingness to answer honestly rather than offering the polite deflection she usually reserved for casual acquaintances. "I'm terrified," she admitted quietly. "I have no idea how I'm going to manage everything alone, financially or otherwise. Trevor was supposed to help with rent, with everything really." Vincenzo's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of Trevor's name, though his voice remained carefully composed. "You won't be facing this entirely alone," he said firmly. "I intend to ensure you have proper support during these first difficult months." Amara studied him with visible surprise. "Mr. Salerno, I couldn't possibly ask that of you," she said quickly. "You're my landlord, not my family. You didn't ask," Vincenzo replied simply, echoing a quiet certainty that left little room for argument. "I'm offering because no mother should have to face this kind of overwhelming uncertainty entirely alone." As they reached her modest apartment building, Vincenzo helped carry Zoe's things upstairs, his careful, gentle handling of the newborn's belongings revealing an unexpected tenderness Amara hadn't anticipated from someone with his composed, authoritative reputation throughout the neighborhood. "If you need anything," he said, pausing at her doorway. "Groceries, help arranging pediatrician appointments, simply someone to call during a difficult night. Please don't hesitate to reach out." Amara felt tears forming unexpectedly at his genuine, unwavering sincerity. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "I don't know how to properly repay this kind of kindness." "There's nothing to repay," Vincenzo said gently. "Simply take care of yourself and your daughter. Over the following weeks," true to his word, Vincenzo checked in regularly, always careful and respectful, never overstepping the boundaries Amara seemed comfortable maintaining. He arranged quietly and without fanfare for a reduction in her rent, given her sudden change in circumstances, and ensured the small flower shop kept her position open with flexible hours as she adjusted to life as a new, single mother. One particularly difficult evening, nearly 3 weeks after Zoe's birth, Amara found herself overwhelmed entirely. Exhaustion and postpartum emotion crashing over her as Zoe cried inconsolably, despite every soothing technique she attempted. Desperate and uncertain, she found herself dialing Vincenzo's number, the one he had insisted she save for exactly this kind of moment. "I don't know what to do," she admitted through exhausted tears the moment he answered. "She won't stop crying and I feel like I'm failing her completely. I'm coming over," Vincenzo replied immediately, urgency evident clearly in his composed voice. "Give me 15 minutes. True to his word, he arrived quickly. And though he readily admitted having no personal experience with infants, his calm, steady presence alone seemed to ease Amara's frantic anxiety considerably. He held Zoe gently, while Amara finally managed a few moments of much-needed rest, his deep, quiet voice humming some vaguely remembered lullaby until the crying finally gradually subsided. When Amara woke nearly an hour later, she found Vincenzo still there, seated carefully in her small living room. Zoe finally sleeping peacefully against his shoulder. "You didn't have to stay this long," she said softly. Genuine gratitude evident clearly in her tired voice. "I wanted to," Vincenzo replied simply, his usually guarded expression considerably softer now as he studied the sleeping infant in his arms. "She's remarkable, you know. Strong, just like her mother." Amara felt warmth spreading through her chest at his gentle, sincere words. "Can I ask you something?" she said carefully. "Why exactly are you doing all this?" "I'm simply your tenant, Mr. Salerno." Vincenzo considered his answer thoughtfully before responding honestly. "Watching Trevor abandon you and Zoe so callously, it reminded me of things I witnessed growing up," he admitted, vulnerability entering his usually composed tone. "I couldn't simply stand by and watch history repeat itself when I had the means to help." Amara studied him closely, curiosity and genuine warmth evident clearly in her thoughtful expression. "Well, what exactly do you do, Mr. Salerno?" she asked carefully. "I've always wondered, given how particular your business dealings seem to be around the neighborhood." Vincenzo hesitated only briefly before answering honestly. "My business isn't entirely conventional," he admitted seriously. "I lead an organization that operates outside typical legal boundaries." Amara absorbed this revelation carefully, processing it with notable calm rather than immediate alarm. "That's certainly unexpected," she admitted honestly, "though I'll admit, everything you've shown Zoe and me these past few weeks matters considerably more to me than assumptions about your profession." Vincenzo felt profound relief flooding through him at her measured, understanding response. Neither he nor Amara yet realized clearly, however, just how significantly this growing, genuine bond would soon draw quiet, curious attention from within his own organization, nor how soon Trevor's careless abandonment would circle back around in a way neither of them could anticipate. Amara had met Trevor nearly 2 years earlier at a mutual friend's birthday party, his easy charm and confident conversation immediately catching her attention during a period of her life when stability had felt particularly elusive. Their relationship had moved quickly, Trevor speaking often of shared apartments and future plans, promises that had felt genuinely reassuring to someone who had spent much of her early 20s simply trying to find solid ground. When Amara discovered she was pregnant nearly a year into their relationship, Trevor's initial reaction had been cautiously supportive, even excited at times, discussing baby names and picturing their small family's future together during quiet evenings that Amara had genuinely believed were building towards something lasting. Looking back now, she recognized the subtle signs she had chosen to overlook. His growing quietness during doctor's appointments, the way he changed the subject whenever she mentioned nursery preparations, the increasing distance that had crept steadily into their relationship as her pregnancy progressed. She had convinced herself, desperately, that these were simply normal anxieties, the natural nervousness any partner might feel facing such a significant life change. She had wanted so badly to believe in the family they had once discussed building together, that she had ignored the increasingly obvious warning signs, until his devastating abandonment in that hospital room made the painful truth undeniable. In the weeks following Trevor's departure, Amara had leaned heavily on her limited support system, her mother living several states away and unable to help beyond occasional phone calls. Her closest friends offering emotional support, though unable to provide the practical, consistent help a newborn genuinely required. She had felt profoundly, overwhelmingly alone during those first difficult weeks, exhaustion and heartbreak compounding daily as she struggled to manage everything entirely by herself. Vincenzo's unexpected, steady presence had changed everything considerably, offering not simply practical support, but genuine companionship during a period when Amara had felt increasingly isolated and afraid. Now sitting together in her small living room during one of his now regular evening visits, Amara found herself sharing more openly about this painful history than she had with anyone since Trevor's departure. "I keep replaying it in my mind," she admitted quietly, watching Vincenzo gently rock Zoe's small bassinet nearby. "Wondering what I missed, what I could have done differently to see it coming sooner." Vincenzo studied her closely, genuine compassion evident clearly in his composed expression. "You didn't miss anything," he said firmly. "You trusted someone who made promises he was never genuinely prepared to keep. That reflects entirely on his character, not your judgment." Amara felt tears forming unexpectedly at his sincere reassurance. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered softly. "I've spent weeks blaming myself for not seeing this coming." "Please don't," Vincenzo said gently, taking her hand carefully in his own. "You've shown remarkable strength these past weeks, Amara. Raising Zoe alone, facing that devastating abandonment with such quiet dignity, that takes considerable courage." Amara studied him closely, warmth spreading through her chest at his genuine, heartfelt words. "You've made these past few weeks considerably more bearable than I ever imagined possible," she admitted honestly. "I don't know how I would have managed without your support." Vincenzo felt something warm and unfamiliar settle within his own chest at her sincere gratitude. "I've genuinely enjoyed being part of these weeks," he admitted honestly, vulnerability entering his usually guarded tone. "Watching you and Zoe, it's shown me something I didn't realize I was genuinely missing from my own life." As their conversation continued deepening naturally that evening, Amara found herself increasingly grateful for the unexpected, genuine connection that had grown steadily between them since that painful night outside the hospital. Neither she nor Vincenzo yet realized clearly, however, that word of his consistent, gentle attention toward a young single mother and her newborn daughter had already begun circulating quietly among his own associates, several of whom found themselves genuinely curious and in some cases increasingly concerned about this uncharacteristic devotion emerging within their usually guarded, formidable leader. Gio, Vincenzo's longtime second-in-command, had noticed the change in his boss over recent weeks, subtle shifts that had become increasingly difficult to overlook. Vincenzo had begun leaving business meetings earlier than usual, occasionally checking his phone, with an expression considerably softer than his typical composed, business-like demeanor, and on more than one occasion, Gio had caught him quietly smiling at something on his screen, entirely unguarded in a way Gio hadn't witnessed in years. "You've been different lately," Gio observed carefully one afternoon, watching Vincenzo prepare to leave for what had become a fairly predictable evening visit across town. "Considerably lighter, I'd say." Vincenzo offered a small, knowing smile, though he didn't immediately confirm or deny Gio's careful observation. "Perhaps I've simply found something genuinely worth valuing outside business matters," he said honestly. Gio studied him closely, genuine curiosity evident clearly in his thoughtful expression. "This is about your tenant, isn't it? The young mother and her baby?" Vincenzo considered his response seriously before answering honestly. "Amara and her daughter Zoe," he confirmed. "I've grown genuinely fond of them both these past several weeks." Gio hesitated before continuing carefully. "Boss, you understand the complications this could introduce," he said seriously. "Given your position, given the enemies who would gladly exploit any personal attachment as genuine vulnerability." Vincenzo's expression grew serious, though quiet determination remained evident clearly beneath his thoughtful consideration. "I'm aware of the risks," he said firmly. "I don't intend to hide this connection out of caution, nor do I intend to abandon something genuinely meaningful simply because it complicates matters." Gio nodded, respecting his boss's evident resolve despite his own lingering concern. "I'll ensure appropriate security measures are quietly implemented," he said seriously, "though given the circumstances." Meanwhile, word of Amara's apparent new, wealthy friend had begun circulating among her small circle of acquaintances. eventually reaching Trevor through a mutual connection who mentioned in passing that Amara's landlord had been seen around considerably more often than a typical property owner might explain. Jealousy and opportunistic curiosity compounded quickly within Trevor's mind, and within days he found himself standing outside Amara's apartment building, determined to reinsert himself into her life for reasons considerably less noble than genuine remorse. He arrived on a quiet afternoon, knocking firmly on her door. Amara opened it cautiously, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise into visible discomfort at his unexpected, unwelcome appearance. "Trevor," she said evenly, though clear guardedness remained evident in her measured tone. "What are you doing here?" "I've been thinking about you and about Zoe," Trevor said quickly, glancing briefly past her shoulder toward the small bassinet visible in the living room. "I made a mistake, Amara. I'd like the chance to be part of her life." Amara studied him carefully, old hurt resurfacing briefly despite her considerable emotional growth over recent weeks. "That's certainly a change from what you said in that hospital room," she said firmly, refusing to allow his sudden, suspiciously timed reappearance to shake her hard-won stability. "I panicked back then," Trevor admitted, though something calculating flickered briefly beneath his practiced expression. "I hear you've been getting some help lately from your landlord. Seems like things are looking up for you both." Amara's eyes narrowed slightly, understanding dawning clearly regarding his true, opportunistic motivation. "This isn't about Zoe at all, is it?" she said directly. "You heard I have support now, and suddenly you're interested again." Trevor's expression faltered slightly under her direct, unflinching accusation. "That's not fair," he protested weakly, though his lack of genuine conviction was evident clearly in his hesitant tone. Gio, Vincenzo's longtime second-in-command, had noticed the change in his boss over recent weeks, subtle shifts that had become increasingly difficult to overlook. Vincenzo had begun leaving business meetings earlier than usual, occasionally checking his phone with an expression considerably softer than his typical composed, business-like demeanor, and on more than one occasion, Gio had caught him quietly smiling at something on his screen, entirely unguarded in a way Gio hadn't witnessed in years. "You've been different lately," Gio observed carefully one afternoon, watching Vincenzo prepare to leave for what had become a fairly predictable evening visit across town. "Considerably lighter, I'd say." Vincenzo offered a small, knowing smile, though he didn't immediately confirm or deny Gio's careful observation. "Perhaps I've simply found something genuinely worth valuing outside business matters," he said honestly. Gio studied him closely, genuine curiosity evident clearly in his thoughtful expression. "This is about your tenant, isn't it? The young mother and her baby?" Vincenzo considered his response seriously before answering honestly. "Amara and her daughter Zoe," he confirmed. "I've grown genuinely fond of them both these past several weeks." Gio hesitated before continuing carefully. "Boss, you understand the complications this could introduce?" he said seriously. "Given your position, given the enemies who would gladly exploit any personal attachment as genuine vulnerability." Vincenzo's expression grew serious, though quiet determination remained evident clearly beneath his thoughtful consideration. "I'm aware of the risks," he said firmly. "I don't intend to hide this connection out of caution, nor do I intend to abandon something genuinely meaningful simply because it complicates matters." Gio nodded, respecting his boss's evident resolve despite his own lingering concern. "I'll ensure appropriate security measures are quietly implemented," he said seriously, "given the circumstances. Meanwhile, word of Amara's apparent new wealthy friend had begun circulating among her small circle of acquaintances, eventually reaching Trevor through a mutual connection who mentioned in passing that Amara's landlord had been seen around considerably more often than a typical property owner might explain. Jealousy and opportunistic curiosity compounded quickly within Trevor's mind, and within days he found himself standing outside Amara's apartment building, determined to reinsert himself into her life for reasons considerably less noble than genuine remorse. He arrived on a quiet afternoon, knocking firmly on her door. Amara opened it cautiously, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise into visible discomfort at his unexpected, unwelcome appearance. "Trevor," she said evenly, though clear guardedness remained evident in her measured tone. "What are you doing here?" Before the tense exchange could continue further, Vincenzo arrived for his regular evening visit. Pausing immediately upon noticing Trevor's presence, his expression shifting into careful, protective composure as he studied the tense scene unfolding at Amara's doorway. Trevor's confident demeanor faltered considerably upon registering Vincenzo's commanding, unmistakably powerful presence. "Is everything all right here?" Vincenzo asked evenly, though unmistakable authority carried clearly beneath his composed tone. "Everything's fine," Amara said firmly, turning back toward Trevor with resolute finality. Trevor was just leaving. "I don't need or want anything from you, Trevor, not now. And not simply because you've heard rumors about my circumstances improving." Trevor, thoroughly intimidated by the shift in atmosphere and clearly recognizing the futility of continuing his transparent attempt, departed quickly without further argument. Once he had gone, Amara turned toward Vincenzo, genuine relief and gratitude evident clearly in her steady expression. "Thank you for arriving when you did," she said honestly. "Though I'll admit, I handled that considerably better than I expected to." Vincenzo studied her closely, admiration evident clearly in his warm expression. "You didn't need my help at all," he said sincerely. "You handled that with remarkable strength, entirely on your own." As their bond continued deepening steadily in the days that followed, Trevor's brief, selfish reappearance having only reinforced Amara's confidence and clarity regarding her genuine feelings for Vincenzo. Neither of them yet realized clearly that a considerably more dangerous threat had already begun taking careful, calculated notice of Vincenzo's growing attachment to the young mother and her infant daughter. Bruno Castellano had spent weeks searching for any genuine weakness within Vincenzo Salerno's carefully guarded organization, frustrated by his rival's consistent refusal to allow personal attachments that might otherwise be exploited for strategic advantage. When his own informants finally reported Vincenzo's growing, genuine attachment to a young single mother and her infant daughter, Bruno felt calculated satisfaction at finally discovering exactly the vulnerability he had been searching for. "Salerno's finally shown a weakness," Bruno said coldly during a private meeting with his most trusted associates. "A woman and her baby, someone he clearly cares for deeply enough to visit almost daily, entirely unprotected by his usual security measures." His associates exchanged uneasy glances, aware clearly of the seriousness behind Bruno's calculated tone. "How do you intend to proceed?" When asked cautiously. "We take the child," Bruno replied firmly, "simply to demonstrate clearly that Salerno's personal attachments make him considerably more vulnerable than his reputation suggests. It will force him to reconsider his territorial expansion into regions I consider rightfully mine." Unaware of this calculated, dangerous plan forming against them, Amara continued her regular routine, genuinely happy for the first time in months as her relationship with Vincenzo continued flourishing steadily. Zoe, now nearly 2 months old, had begun recognizing Vincenzo's voice, her small face brightening with recognition each time he visited. One afternoon, while a trusted neighbor watched Zoe briefly during a quick errand, 2 of Bruno's men approached quietly, having carefully studied the family's routine over recent days. Exploiting a brief moment when the neighbor's attention was drawn toward a delivery at her own door, they attempted to slip into the apartment building unnoticed, intending to seize the opportunity, while Zoe remained temporarily unguarded. Fortunately, the building's newly installed security system, quietly arranged by Vincenzo weeks earlier as a simple, cautious precaution, immediately alerted his security team to the unauthorized entry attempt. Vincenzo's men arrived within minutes, intercepting the intruders before they could reach the apartment. The frightened men, fleeing quickly before they could be properly identified or apprehended. When Vincenzo received the urgent call regarding the attempted breach, fury and terror crashed over him simultaneously. He rushed immediately to Amara's building, finding her frantically checking on Zoe, who remained safely asleep, entirely unaware of how close danger had actually come. "Are you both all right?" he asked urgently, relief flooding through him upon confirming Zoe remained unharmed. "We're okay," Amara replied, though clear fear remained evident in her trembling voice. "But Vincenzo, someone tried to break in. This wasn't random, was it?" Vincenzo's expression hardened instantly, guilt and fierce anger evident clearly beneath his controlled exterior. "This is connected to me," he admitted honestly. "I should have increased your protection sooner, before this danger ever came close to reaching you both." Amara studied him closely, fear and understanding mixing within her. "Who would do this?" she asked directly, though she suspected clearly the answer connected somehow to Vincenzo's complicated world. "Bruno Castellano," Vincenzo explained grimly. "A rival who's clearly identified my attachment to you and Zoe as an opportunity to weaken my position." Amara felt overwhelming fear at this revelation, though determination quickly replaced her initial terror. "What do we do now?" she asked firmly, refusing to allow fear to paralyze her when her daughter's safety remained genuinely at stake. Vincenzo took her hands gently, sincerity and fierce protectiveness evident clearly in his intense gaze. "I promise you, Amara, I will end this threat completely," he said firmly. "You and Zoe will have round-the-clock protection immediately, and I intend to ensure Bruno faces serious, immediate consequences for endangering an innocent child." Working quickly and decisively alongside Gio and his most trusted men, Vincenzo began gathering intelligence regarding Bruno's location and operations, determined to neutralize the threat before any further danger could reach Amara and Zoe. Meanwhile, mother and daughter remained under careful, constant protection within Vincenzo's own secure estate, Amara finding herself genuinely grateful for his immediate, decisive action despite the frightening circumstances that had necessitated it. "I never wanted to put you both in danger," Vincenzo admitted quietly that evening, watching Zoe finally fall asleep peacefully within the estate's guest room. "This is exactly the complication I feared when I first considered pursuing genuine feelings for you." Amara studied him closely, warmth and understanding evident clearly in her tired expression. "You didn't create this danger, Vincenzo," she said firmly. "Bruno did, through his own reckless cruelty. I don't regret choosing you, even knowing the risks." Vincenzo felt profound gratitude and renewed determination at her genuine, unwavering support. "Then I intend to end this threat completely," he said resolutely, "ensuring you and Zoe never have to face this kind of danger again." As Vincenzo's men worked tirelessly through the night, gathering crucial intelligence, both he and Amara understood clearly that the coming confrontation with Bruno would determine not only their family's immediate safety, but the entire future they had only just begun building together. Working through the night with Gio and his most trusted associates, Vincenzo successfully traced Bruno Castellano's operations to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, gathering enough evidence of his reckless, unauthorized attack targeting an innocent family to justify decisive, immediate action. By morning, Vincenzo's men had surrounded the location, moving carefully and methodically to neutralize the threat while minimizing any further risk to innocent bystanders. Bruno, upon realizing his carefully planned scheme had failed and his location had been fully compromised, attempted a desperate escape only to be swiftly intercepted and apprehended by Vincenzo's experienced men. Facing overwhelming evidence of his reckless endangerment of a child, evidence that would prove deeply damaging to his reputation and standing among other powerful families, Bruno found himself with no meaningful leverage remaining. "You made a serious mistake targeting an innocent family," Vincenzo said coldly, confronting Bruno directly once he had been securely detained. This ends now, completely and permanently. Bruno, recognizing the complete collapse of his reckless scheme, offered no further resistance, understanding clearly the serious consequences awaiting him for such a reckless, dishonorable attack. With his threat fully neutralized and his standing among other criminal organizations thoroughly destroyed by his own reckless actions, the danger to Amara and Zoe finally, completely passed when Vincenzo returned to his estate that morning. Exhausted but triumphant, he found Amara waiting anxiously, relief flooding through her instantly upon seeing him safely returned. "It's over," he said softly, gently pulling her into a warm embrace. "Bruno's threat has been completely neutralized. You and Zoe are safe." Amara felt overwhelming relief crash over her, tears of gratitude forming gently in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered softly, "for protecting us so completely." Vincenzo studied her closely, sincerity and profound love evident clearly in his composed expression. "Protecting you and Zoe isn't simply an obligation," he said firmly. "It's exactly what love means to me." In the weeks that followed, with the danger fully resolved, life gradually settled into a peaceful, joyful rhythm for their newly formed family. Amara and Zoe moved permanently into Vincenzo's estate, Zoe growing more and more attached to Vincenzo's gentle, consistent presence with each passing day, her small face lighting up every time he entered a room. One quiet evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from the estate's peaceful garden, Vincenzo turned toward Amara, sincerity clear in his warm expression. "Amara," he began softly, "these past months have shown me exactly what genuine family means. I'd like to make that official, if you're willing." Amara studied him closely, her heart racing as she registered the small, elegant ring Vincenzo produced carefully from his pocket. "Vincenzo," she whispered, overwhelmed with genuine happiness. "I love you completely," Vincenzo said sincerely, "and I love Zoe as though she were genuinely my own daughter. Will you marry me and allow me the honor of building a real, lasting family alongside you both?" Tears of overwhelming joy streamed down Amara's face as she nodded quickly. "Yes," she whispered softly, "absolutely, yes." Their wedding, held quietly within the same peaceful garden months later, celebrated not simply the union between Amara and Vincenzo, but the genuine, lasting family they had built together, proving considerably stronger and more meaningful than any of the painful rejection Amara had endured during those devastating early days as a new, abandoned mother. Reflecting quietly that evening, watching Vincenzo carry Zoe happily on his shoulders as their small wedding celebration continued joyfully around them, Amara considered deeply the remarkable, unexpected journey that had led her from devastating hospital room heartbreak toward genuine, lasting happiness. What had begun with Trevor's cruel, careless abandonment in a quiet hospital room ultimately transformed into something Amara had never imagined possible. A genuine, loving family built entirely on authentic devotion, proving clearly that true love shows up completely, standing firmly beside the people it cherishes, rather than walking away the moment things become difficult.